virtutem et pacem adversis in temporibus sustinere lumen tuum dirigere spes aeterna cor meum implere fiduciam habeo in misericordia tua et semper laudabo nomen tuum. Spiro, spero, Domine, in te confido et sperabo semper, dammi virtutem et pacem. Adversis in temporibus sustinere lumen tuum dirigere spes aeterna cor meum implere fiduciam habeo in misericordia tua et semper laudabo nomen
Hello, good evening. Those present here in Figueira and those who are accompanying us in the channel of Irdin in YouTube and Instagram. The theme of today is the Esoteric Glossary, the inner strength for overcoming worlds, for overcoming fears. This word fears is associated to something different within each one. We have some questions that could help us relate from other sharings, lectures. The previous lectures are on the channel of the Irdin. Those who want can access it and study it. So the questions they are questions that are very much related to this. The person says, with the awakening of her consciousness, a lot is being unbuilt, mainly related to religion, etc. How to be sure about what is real and what is an illusion. And someone else says, I searched for self-knowledge for a long time in my life, but lately I have lost faith. I'm really tired nowadays. In these reflections, we come from the premise that we have understood that we are a soul, that we have one life after the other, and therefore we have many previous experiences that have marked us, both drawing our trajectory as well as leaving some marks. And depending on our search moment throughout this trajectory, throughout lifetimes, when we reach a stage which is the stage of today for humanity as a whole, which is to make a synthesis and entering a more mature, more adult stage, in that which we call search. Generally, our personality, our more conscious part, reacts very much, and a lot of the subconscious also reacts a lot. So first of all, what could be real or an illusion? When in this search we begin to find something real, we gradually find an inner security that we are on the right path and a clear indication about our next step, what we are supposed to transform in order to take our next step. It should be a process that flows very peacefully. And when it is not, it could be an indication that we are accumulating pendencies. That is, we know what we are supposed to live and assume, but we don't do it. So the list increases and it generates a pressure that at a certain point could give this sensation of tiredness and abandonment. So it's real when it brings a feeling of inner security and an indication of our next step. And it could be illusion when it comes from stimuli, practices that are created by ambition. So as an ambition, we keep on doing practices and spiritual exercises, getting apparent results, and your soul wants something else. You're being more aligned with your inner state, which is a level of gradual unity with the higher levels. It's something that is very different. So this person who feels tired and all of this could be this. We are looking for empty practice, rituals and practices that are empty, that don't correspond to what our inner worlds need. So our more profound self withdrawals, go distances a little bit, pointing out that is not through there. So you should get gradually emptier of this artificial search. And if you begin to feel an inner presence, it could be a breath, an encouragement for the beginning of a new cycle. Something is correct, that giving up is not an option. Inner strength, as an impulse of this sharing, refers to states of consciousness and energies that dwell regions within us that we don't normally access. We are a mental, intellectual, rational thinking race, and generally we guide through our previous experience or attachment for a previous experience in which we have had a sort of a gratification. So we try to repeat our experience. So inner strength is this place within us that emanates a different state of consciousness, a different energy that could help us to overcome fear. So let us understand the difference between the verbs. Verbs are actions. They promote actions. The verb overcome is not to control. And this is an important understanding in the face of what we call fear or panic, because our greatest difficulty oftentimes before these states is to want to control something that is initially triggered by something that we don't have control of. So a feeling of fear, panic emerges. So to overcome is one thing and control is something else, as we will see here. And we have to truly be very patient with all of this, because again, if the premise is that we are beings who reincarnate, we bring traumas, experiences of frustration, and many situations from many lifetimes that, due to some trigger in this incarnation, could suscitate a memory or make a memory merge that is even a memory of the cells of all of this. Within the work that we are accompanying, the work of Trigueirinho, we have been accompanying throughout these years. We have had a researcher among us known as Clemente Friar Luciano in the recent cycle. He left a book called Healing Through Hidden Chemistry. So there is an approach about the theme of presence when we imprison the light within us in these states that we call fear. And let us take care so that we are not imprudent, thinking that we don't have fear, because this is not something conscious. This is something that emerges from a dark space of our consciousness or collective unconscious. So we should hear this as a reflection for all of us. We should be very humble to listen to this. So as I was saying, we have a tendency of wanting to face this, and we know we are dealing with a ghost that, if it is activated or not, this happens a little randomly, depending on our capacity of accompanying the whole movement. And this oftentimes paralyzes us and makes our evolution difficult, because for sure it paralyzes us and weakens all our states of consciousness that brings more vitality, the feeling of this inner presence, the security that we are on the right path. So when fear emerges or a situation of panic, this tends to paralyze us, and depending on the intensity, make our inner stability difficult. Well, in the first lecture we carried out, if I'm not mistaken, February 1st or February 8th, we enhanced very much the fact that the basis of the Esoteric Glossary is related to parts of the human consciousness which we don't give attention to. We speak superficially about our spirit, but we don't really live this, for this to be a little bit more familiar and gradually imprint states of consciousness in us that don't belong to the ego or the personality. So this more conscious level that we call ego or personality is a sort of builder of individuality, separativity or separateness, and fear. So it's a nucleus that tries to force for things to always be around it, which is the practice of selfishness and this tendency of controlling things. There's a sort of panic, which is panic for open space, which emerges when the consciousness realizes that they don't have control over that. who has the control on having before the horizon, before the ocean. This could activate, trigger panic, for example. So the ego and concrete mind are these traps within our constitution that, first of all, need to be accepted because they are part of our constitution. But we shouldn't stop there. We who, in this context, are looking for something beyond all of this should always remember that our concrete mind and our ego are the constructors, the builders of this individuality and the origin of fears. Well, and also a consciousness that is very known in the contemporary world called Padre Pio, a saint from a certain religious institution. He used to say that curiosity is very dangerous. So when we are looking for something higher, hidden, mystical, the search through only curiosity or search for power or for dealing with energies, we are opening a door for fear because we don't have control over this. Do you remember Walt Disney movie, The Apprentice of Witch? The Mickey, if I'm not mistaken, he's playing with the broom, doing gestures, and he activates many situations that he doesn't have control on later on. So the search for control, self-knowledge, we have to be careful with this because it could put us in contact with things that we could not deal with later on. But a healthy search will gradually bring the process in a balanced, serene way, bringing this inner security. Well, when we make a decision at a certain point of really doing this search, carrying out this search, we oftentimes do this when we are tired of everything else that is not this search. So let us not see this tiredness as something negative. It is a thermometer that we are knocking on the wrong door. So this tiredness could be, don't insist because this is not your path. So if we quiet down and begin to search within us, for sure our inner world itself will lead us this line of resistance built in previous lives, and we will have again a feeling of inner security and re-encounter with something that is profoundly familiar. So what does it have to do with fear? When our personality and mind feel that our consciousness, which is not our mind, and that is not entirely imprisoned by our personality. Our consciousness is something else. So when our consciousness wakes up from this game and begins to deny these rational matters which bring division and dissociation, there is that which we call guardians of the threshold, which are aspects of ours from other lifetimes, which gather and begin to bring this stimulation within us for the search. And we cannot avoid the contact with all of this because this is part of our process to awaken to that which is real and the human aspects that try to delude us and convince us about other things. So in this movement, this tension, all of humanity is to be found in this process at this moment because the cycle has really come for humanity to wake up massively to its higher levels. And as we are very heterogeneous as humanity, each one searches for that line of smaller or lesser resistance. But this process is inevitable, really. And it's not that we find this guardian of the threshold and we perceive the situation, this game, we transcend. In the next stage, there is another group of guardian of the thresholds or guardians of the threshold that will meet us again until we can go through a more profound expansion of consciousness, and when we will not be deluded by the aspects that are being purified in this cycle. This is why I was saying that to go through this spiritual search in a mature way, we have to have a lot of patience, calm, not lose courage, not give up because it's not an option, and learn how to wait because these cycles also pass. And one of the presentations of this guardian of the threshold or this guardian of the threshold within our consciousness is bringing situations of fear, panic or insecurity. So let us be attentive because again, it's not a matter or an issue of just a few of us who are diagnosed with fear. It's an intrinsic situation of human beings generally. Well, so when this emerges combined with forces of the collective, of that which is within our unconscious or subconsciousness as not realized wishes, loss of control over that which we thought we had control over, all of this gestates this feeling that we call fear, which in reality does not exist. It's just a word. But now I leave a question here. Do we want to leave this situation of fear? When this fear emerges, do we face it like we face a ghost? Have you seen when we are in a dark room and the mosquitoes come, we don't see them, we try to get them? Generally we lose, the mosquitoes win. So this fear that emerges could activate a similar sensation in the consciousness. We don't know where it is coming from, where it's going to cause us, what it could trigger. And we see here a certain projection of the subject of fear and panic, even in our nervous system. It's something very important. Well, so the question is, do we want to leave this when it emerges, or do we fear to be afraid? So you see how our psyche is complex. Because if it causes trauma to us, at a certain point we are afraid of going through this again. So it's an energy that compresses, right? As we will see in the nervous system or in the mental emotional body, and could even cause and it causes psychosomatic situations. So we are going to see here 12 fears. It's not that they don't exist anymore, or unfoldings of these fears. Some keys to deal with all of this, remembering that it is within this context of those who are seeking something higher. It is like when the airplane goes up and it has to go through the low pressure region, the temperature is still high, and at a certain point it stabilized, but it's inevitable to go through the clouds at a certain point. So we have to be more consciousness about this. We relate with every day. Fear to something that is unknown. Again, the concrete mind is gradually form a data bank through memory and previous experience, and everything that is unknown and could eventually activate a sort of fear, this fear of not knowing how to deal with something that is unknown. This could also come from collective unconscious. So even for a matter of psychic, emotional, and internal and spiritual matter, today we have to be very careful with the sort of content that we call contact from the collective. So until the 1990s, we would go to a place where there was the presence of the collective or the proximity to considerable collective, but today technology puts us in contact with that which is collective through technology. And these forces of collective unconsciousness exist to practically generate these fears. Why? So that these negative forces can have control, power, or influence over our minds and our conscious capacity of working. So another region of ours that within time could generate many fears is our prejudice regarding different situations. So we could create situations of association with concepts. There's a dog here. This is why I'm laughing. He came to participate in the sharing about fear. This is why I'm laughing. So these prejudices could also paralyze our consciousness, and in this paralysis give the sensation that is very similar to fear. So be careful with this theme of construction and nourishing fears. This is why the love to that which is unknown or being unknown could help us. It's not an stimuli to embrace anything. Then this fear of body death that comes generally through images of this body death that we have witnessed close to us, that creates an association of our consciousness experiencing that body without a life, to activate a very particular sort of fear. It could also come from our contact with the collective astral. The astral plane is very close to the physical plane. It's very similar even. So much so when we leave this concrete experience, the first plane we have to go through and also disincarnate from is the astral plane. And there, the consciousnesses that have left the physical plane, that have disincarnated, carry a trauma about the way they have disincarnated, a suffering. So this fear to body death through images, it's a fear that is there also, and we have to know about it. Here there is a very common fear that we don't associate with what we were reflecting about in the beginning, which is the fear of discontrol of individual power. So we know that this human situation placing us before false power, and life itself shows us that we don't have power over anything and control over anything. And if we nourish insistence in this artificial fear, we could cause us a fear of losing power over others. And something important within this is our not negligencing this work over ourselves. And we should ask ourselves, do I have this tendency of wanting to control others with my thoughts, with my thought forms, with my way of leading things? It's a very necessary and healthy reflection. Another door that could lead us to this third sort of fear is when we don't do everything we could in a certain situation. So we know we can put ourselves entire before something, but for some reason we don't do it. And within time, this generates sort of a looseness or atrophiates our potential of contacting our consciousness to do the best we can. And it could generate this sort of fear for this control of the individual power. And also connected to this fear of this control of individual power is to lose the proportion of our own forces. When we take steps that are larger than our legs, as they say, and as I was saying, as it is not something within our logic, let us say our balance, this will gradually bring a reaction or an interaction with forces, situations that we don't have maturity to control or deal with. So this loss of proportion of our own forces is a way of creating states of fear within our consciousness. You see, generally we don't give attention to this, we don't do our best, we don't measure our forces, our strength, we are curious. All of this generates within the conscious a condition for fear to emerge suddenly, and we don't know where it is coming from. A fear that is very much connected to this is the fear not to overcome our own limits. So it's connected with the previous one in the sense that it is another aspect of this. Evolutionary process, even in nature, is always generated by positive pressure, even. Is an impulse that goes beyond the normal state of a situation. So this fear of not overcoming limits could also be associated when we, for some reason, we activate in this lifetime, this incarnation, a situation that again is a trigger for an experience that we have had in this life years ago or in another lifetime, in another incarnation. So in these traumas that we all experience, many stages are incomplete. So when the limit or something that we call limit comes, what is a limit? To show that we have to apply, mobilize a force, an energy, an intention beyond what we used to apply in the previous moments. So when we are going through this, we have to find this inner force to transcend the limit. When on the other hand, due to our arrogance and we have an excess trust in ourselves as egos, as a personality, this could at a certain point lead to a situation which is our own higher being, our own inner world, our soul, our spirit, are different levels of degrees of ourselves in another dimension. This level could bring a lesson to us, representing one and another failure, for us to stop insisting in this process of excessive confidence in ourselves as human beings. So it's connected to the theme of loss of correct proportions, and it generates fears for the non-overcoming of limits. Of course, when we enter this work of search in our profound level, we recognize that something begins to act in us, this something that comes from another level. This is where this force comes from. It's not a process of the consciousness transcending itself on the level of the personality, because no ego wants to transcend itself. It's a defect of the ego. Since the beginning, it was created for everything to go around itself, how it's going to think about the destruction of itself. This is only possible when we are connected or open to our higher level, and from there comes an attraction for us to also identify with our individuality on another level, which is not selfishness, as we know here. The fifth one is the fear for loss of inner faith. This happens when we mix faith with belief, when we believe something or we deposit something, that which we call faith, either in someone else or a group or affirmation. All of this within time could lead us to fear of loss of this inner faith. So we should know very well what we are looking for, how we are going to look for, to discern very well the moment of humanity, of the planet, which is very heterogeneous, with many incomplete stages. There is a great mixture of impulses, and we have to learn how to discern what we are looking for, what we are finding, and discern what this causes us and brings us, what it mobilizes within our consciousness. And what helps on the day today for our not entering this hole of this sort of fear is our being faithful to something. Not being faithful to something, but to that which we know that is correct for us. So when we betray something that we know that is correct for us, it could generate this fear of loss of inner faith. The sixth fear, it's the fear of spiritual retrogress. So we have had a considerable oscillation throughout our lifetimes, and we have had lifetimes in which we found guides, masters, references who led us to take an evolutionary step, and on the other hand we didn't. We entered groups or were accompanied by consciousnesses who frustrated us, if we could use this word in this context. So it could generate this fear of being deceived again. It's a trigger that can be activated. And it could generate this fear for spiritual retrogress, of not even understanding how those who eventually we trust and we dedicate our conscious to follow a certain line have eventually frustrated us. And we have many experiences of this connected to this, both in this incarnation as well as in other points of the universe. This could really cause this feeling of being deceived, this fear of retrogressing and entering some work or great religion or group in which eventually traces of this could trigger this. And there is a fear that is a little bit more human, which is the fear for the blocking ideas and projects, of stopping the flow of ideas and projects. We live in a human society that triggers many beginnings and providing few possibilities of continuing things. This of beginning many things and not continuing them generates in our subconsciousness, in our unconsciousness, the weakening of the energy of the will energy. The things that have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and close a cycle. This is particular in this energy of will, and when it is blocked because it wasn't concretized, it could generate a fear for blocking ideas, projects. So we have to watch very much this tendency we have of beginning many things and not concluding them. This leads us to the trap of comfort, and if we fall there, we are tied and the sphere may emerge. The sphere will emerge inevitably, and something that could also activate the sphere of blocking ideas and projects is when situations don't evolve as we had foreseen, but they work out through another way. But as we want to have the control over that, we don't admit that it worked out through a different way. It could emerge this fear, the fear of blocking ideas and projects, which is a little childish in this, from this point of view. Now there is another fear which is very common, which is a fear of being judged and the fear to evidences. So when we lose that authenticity, it's a decision, an inner decision of being what we are. We want to evolve from the point we are, but we should avoid characters, that hypocrisy of looking like something we are not. So this love for being true, authentic, and transparent is the antidote for us to be afraid of being judged, and when something is evident, something that eventually in our judgment or interpretation is not what we created artificially, as if it were ourselves. Can you follow the reflection? So when we insist in this process of not being transparent through the sphere in our subconsciousness, enters there because we internally know we are not that which we try to look like, isn't it? So we have to be very careful with this sort of fear, because it gets us in the moment when we don't expect. The fear that we will come up, be evident, and there our pride will be very much faced in this tendency of not being genuine and transparent. So this insistence of collective consciousness of wanting to mold people as they should be, if we enter this sort of impulse, this also creates this sort of fear sooner or later, because we are pressured to repeat a collective parameter that generally has nothing to do with us, and at a certain point our inner world, our soul, or even our more mature human consciousness will feel a dissociation from all of this, and it could be an experience that is not so pleasing. And this fidelity of our sustaining that which we know that is correct for us and assume this. I'm not nourishing a mad life, okay? I'm just saying that if we are in a healthy search, a balanced search, we should try to express it naturally and not be dragged by this collective tendency that will cause us to leave ourselves and eventually experience this fear. And it happens a lot, especially with young people, of being ashamed of sustaining an idea that is different from the collective parameter, that which we call bullying. So we end up being dragged into this, and we don't find inner strength, that support for us to be that which we know we are supposed to be in that experience. We are dragged by this experience. This is the fear of judgment and evidences. Then the fear of falling into inner abyss. So let us be attentive to this, because this is a very frequent fear also. This abyss can present itself as an abyss. What is an abyss in this moment of our reflection? When we are before something that seems to have no end, right? It seems like it's endless. So this fear of falling in an abyss, it's when eventually we insist in going through a way that we know that will deceive us. But something in our personality or our mind, our emotional body insists in that due to some gratification or external experience insisting in this. So it's a great learning experience for our to learn how to identify when this fear of falling into the inner abyss emerges. A very important aspect before healing or prevention, or an attitude when this fear eventually emerges, is our learning to continue with that which we are dedicating to. If we are abandoning many things, many stages of our search throughout the path, we make a decision of working on silence or having a greater attention on what we speak or how we speak or the quality with which we speak. But I stop there, I'm going to work on humility, and then I abandon this, I'm going to work on something else. So there are many things without continuity. So these gaps adding to one another could bring to the consciousness a fear of falling into inner abyss. All these things that didn't create an inner strength, inner fortitude for us to deal with these fears, these incomplete things. And also our partial and incomplete attention to this subtle life, our abstract life. From March, April, we will dedicate to a cycle of lectures only about dreams. So who considers this moment as a part of that which they call their life? We spend practically 1/3 of our lives, those who are more inert, even more than this. Are we dead when we are sleeping? Our subtle bodies oftentimes work in our consciousness much more when our physical bodies, in that which we call sleeping, than when we are awake with active brain and nervous system active. So if we learned how to create a continuity of consciousness, you see many people who had many lifetimes in the East with many practices, spiritual practices, and are only focused in the exercise, the practice, but not in the state of consciousness that the exercise creates, the condition that that practice creates. So the essence is the state of consciousness, that this practice creates. So if we are just focused on the practice itself, the state of consciousness does not remain in our consciousness. We contact the state of peace, alignment, inner joy, whatever, but we don't retain that state. Why? Because we are tied to the exercise, the practice, not the state of consciousness. Can you see the difference? So if we don't connect these states of consciousness, our consciousness clearly perceive these gaps among all these states which could eventually generate a fear of falling into inner abyss if we join all these gaps. That is a fear of not having a consistency, calcificating, if we can use this word, those states once, time and again. The 10th fear is the fear of consequences of universal laws. So every being who at a certain point begins this more profound search begins to see that there is a higher consciousness, but you know that there is something with capital S which rules everything that exists, which is very mysterious. But when we awake to this, something in us really begins to have a more humble attitude, creating a relationship within. It's like having an appointment. Is this okay? Should I go through this? Each one has a way of doing this. a feeling in the heart, each one that have their own way of doing this. They have their own mechanism. But the important thing is to perceive the mechanism. When through this mechanism we perceive through intuition, we know we are being helped and we perceive something, but we go through the other side. This generates within our consciousness, subconsciousness, a fear of not being following this. So we have to give a lot of attention to this process of search for inner strength, because this comes from within us. It's not psychological. If we are not careful, when these fears emerge, we feel very impotent. We don't know what it is coming from, what's going to do with us, what it could trigger within our consciousness, as we will see when we deal with the subject of panic. And when we begin to think or experience in some degree with this contact with this something that is higher, our personality knows perfectly well that it's not going to renounce control. So this is why it's important for us to watch our consciousness and the movement of our personality and our minds. We have to learn how to identify, because they are different things. Our consciousness can use our bodies and mind, and our mind could imprison our mind on the other side, but our consciousness is much freer than our concrete mind. So when the ego insists in not renouncing, it's going to create a condition so that one day can create a sort of fear of being disobeying, which is a strong word, or doing something different to what their intuition is telling them to do. There is a fear that is very important, which sooner or later we deal with this, which is the fear of involution and deterioration of the matter of the bodies and loss of vitality, and that which we call precoce aging. So this is part of our human evolution, and this begins through the lack of information of the stages of our incarnation, or each incarnation. So when we don't mature each stage of our human experience, the tendency at a certain point, chronologically or not, that which we call young people who are destroyed through their habits, food, way of thinking, they lose vitality and they begin to age. It's also due to an inner attitude. So this fear of deterioration of matter is something that we really have to give a lot of attention. And for those who are in this search, we have to know, and we should learn that through the exercise or spiritual practice, or whichever name we want to give to this, that from there vitality comes from, and this vitality is the presence of a replica or reflection of this greater something which is part of us, which is beginning to flow in our consciousness and bodies. And the danger of this, it has happened a lot in the East. When a certain energy comes, the personality wants to encapsulate that energy and use it for itself, for its own benefit, for their own benefit, with power or vitality out of proportion or arrogance, pride. So you see how our human condition moves and how we have to know it to help it to evolve. We don't have any way to deny it. Those who insist in an ascetic process of denying all of this will become disappointed and will fall from very high. So if we could be educated since childhood, our process goes through many stages, and at a certain point we begin to mature, not to age. To age is something different, something else. But do we see like this, or are we connected to this collective thought that we are aging? Can't we change this? And in this condition, in this search, bring this vitality in profound levels to fulfill here what we have come to fulfill here. And we know we have come here for something. But are we looking for this profound sense for our lives? Or we are in everyone's lives and we experience deterioration in matter and loss of vitality. This will be inevitable if we don't change our attitude. Of course, chronologically, the body has its laws and will go through its process, but we have to prepare ourselves and create a condition for this to happen in the best way possible. Not artificial processes which lead us to transcend this sort of thing. And that's 12th sort of fear, to conclude this part of this lecture, is the fear of the higher will. So all of those, even those who do practice of yoga or any sort of practice that is only a practice, an exercise, they begin to perceive that from this something comes an impulse that we identify as higher will. And as we are educated in each lifetime to self-affirm our human self-realization in a process of self-affirmation, when we wake up, this fear could emerge, because there is this game between personal will, the will of the personality, and the will of the higher levels, or this broader will that we are beginning to learn how to contact. So this is why when we are in contact with many pieces of information, and as I said in many lectures, the idea is that in the next semester we may enter a different sort of content. If we don't prepare this land, our character, our personality will deviate a lot. The whole information that will come afterwards for its own benefit or its own power, and not for a healthy expansion of consciousness, or, as I said in the previous lecture, our awakening to the evolutionary plan, awakening for the existence of evolutionary plan. It's not for us humanly, it's because we compose something that is very mysterious, that which is a broader life that we have learned, we are learning how to discover gradually. So to conclude here, we are going to approach the subject of panic here, which is an expression of this subject of fear, and some reflections here could help us to have some elements for these situations. Every time we are before a decisive moment. What is a decisive moment? When we know we are going to take a step that will have a repercussion that goes much beyond something that can be controlled or measured on a human level. So this decisive moment, all the fears of frustration from previous experiences go around our consciousness, oftentimes confronting us, isn't it? Don't try, you won't manage to do it. Are you going to try it again? So it's in our unconsciousness. Want to eliminate this use of will. So when we are before this decisive moment, some causes which have led to frustration in previous experiences could bring the sensation of paralysis, abrupt paralysis, which we call panic. It's a paralysis. At this moment, what happens is that our astral body, let us remember, we have the physical body permeating the physical body. This is also in the Esoteric Glossary. It's a subtle electricity which permeates and subtilizes our physical body. Then we have the astral body, then the mental body. When we have an impact in a decisive moment, this triggering of indecision, of this moment of paralysis, there is this moment of abrupt detaching of astral body, and the body sees itself without that element. The astral body permeates. It's a body that permeates our physical aura, and it detaches a little bit and pressures the inferior levels of the mental body. So it's very common in a panic attack the person to report that they have a sort of a mental pressure, even here, because the astral body detaches from the physical body, compressing the mental body, and as an automatic response sends to the nervous system this impression of contraction, provoking the sensation of panic. When this triggering, this trigger that makes panic emerge through a previous experience, it brings an experience or insecurity from this memory. It's a memory of that frustration or that failure, let us say, before some experience. This is why these decisive moments are so important, and we have to deal with them with a lot of wisdom, patience, and calm, really, because it's a moment that many things are activated at the same time, and we know that we don't have control on all those points that are being activated. But what generates this panic, this insecurity, or a distrust that is characteristic when we see ourselves before previous experience that is triggered, which was not a good experience. So when panic, this word could cause us to think of someone shouting, screaming, or sort of assert. No, we can have many ways of panic that is very imperceptible. So when we have a tendency of losing discernment for some reason, and we don't discern what is happening, and we have a tendency to fantasy, a very imaginative tendency, we imagine many things. The tendency is that we create a condition for our astral body to increase everything, to make everything bigger. Everything that had a proportion that becomes huge, this grows and causes such an impact, but it wasn't like this. It loses proportion, so this emotional panic, many of us have this, maybe not in such an acute way, but we have to watch so much all the things we add, how we increase situations through this such a precarious and selfish way, which is victimism. Things have a size, a measure. This comes, and when it is not looked for by us, everything that comes to us, which we didn't look for, comes to bring a learning experience in the right measure. If it's searched by ambition, it's going to be in a different proportion. And we should know that it could generate emotional panic in which we will see everything big, like a lens, and this will pressure a lot the emotional plane. And this is very delicate. If we are educating ourselves to see things with discernment in the correct proportion, so if at some point it emerges in the emotional body a moment of history, it would be very much easier for our consciousness to contain that movement in order for it to not trigger such a unpleasing sensation of being compressed by something. On the mental plane, the mental panic can be presented. It's a condition that we create very often. Attention to this is a tendency that we have of remaining in a fixed thought and not managing to come out from this. So we have a mental torture with a thought form over something. It's a condition we create so that at some point we have mental panic. So you see the state of humanity. When humanity increases things, loses proportion of things, and when we are fixed into thoughts, we are going around that same thought, and at a certain point it could generate a mental panic. In the case of psychosomatic panic, it emerges when emotional disorganization pressures the nervous system, which triggers many electrical impulses, many reactions, which generate these psychosomatic symptoms, which are not precisely illnesses, this excessive emotional pressure in a certain intention, which generates a reflection on the physical body. And a panic, sort of panic that we don't give much attention to, is the panic from the past, when our consciousness remains in previous cycles due to attachment or for wanting to repeat certain experiences. They don't manage to detach from this, nourishing situations from the past continuously. So at a certain point, this panic could present itself, and it is when the consciousness cannot abandon or leave behind something that no longer exists, but they are connecting with imagination or recreating something that no longer exists, and therefore creates many unreal things, which are sources of a lot of suffering. Those who have this sort of panic know how disturbing this is, because we know that this doesn't exist any longer, but it's tied to us, and we don't manage to abandon the situation, to leave this situation behind. So all these fears and panics emerge at the margin and close to the abyss. And the first question within us, when is this going to end? Because the sensation is that this is endless, because this is so intense, important. So this is why it's important to do this process of inner strength, of finding within us, which is not psychological, it's our inner world, to look for this alignment, this strength, to gradually mold, educate, and find other levels within us so that we won't be so susceptible to our human and mental conditions only. And here in this three-dimensional world that we live, where we live, this opening to higher realities is not searched for. Generally, most people either look for something higher either when they go through a abrupt loss, or when there is an accident they call God. This is very common. Or when there is an impact. In that shock, their unconsciousness knows that there is something greater than all of this, and they begin to invoke that. But it's not common that spontaneously, unless after many cycles, that we have the initiative of searching our inner life, for our inner life. And we should all know that we will inevitably have to go through that which is the concrete mind, the personality, the human ego, the human condition, because this is part of our learning experience to wake up to our inner level, to deal, mold, and heal our human condition, preparing ourselves for a humanity which will be intuitive and will be polarized on a different level, on a different state of consciousness. The good news from all of this, to conclude this lecture of today, is that if we always have this decision of, I'm going to be the best I can be today, I'm going to do the best until the end, the way I can, I will always try to give more to find a potential that I still do not know within myself, and thus I'm going to walk in a more peaceful and fluid, flowing way. When we overcome all these states, all of these retain our consciousness, and this will be inevitable that in this retaining of the consciousness, these states in the subconsciousness and unconsciousness begin to fermentate. So we have to have a lot of decision and reflect if we are seeking this inner strength or a sort of a spiritual exercise or even physical exercise to promote relief of something. One thing is to enter an integral yoga, whole yoga, in that which I create a condition to re-identify myself, repolarize my consciousness on these higher levels. Something else is to practice something on a certain level to reach a certain relief from some situation. This won't bring inner strength or fortitude for overcoming fears, which is the theme of the lecture of today. So we can reflect on all of this today, each one on their own way, living this search, this inner encounter from where the strength will come for us to deal with all of this, which is normal. It's normal to feel, it's not normal to feel all these fears and panics, but it's normal to feel fear. So next week I will be in Buenos Aires on the 8th, but I will record the lecture before. It will be transmitted on Saturday, normally. These are open lectures, and we will continue with all this content. Good night, good overcoming of fears, good mobilizing of inner strength, and let's move on. Giving up is not an option. Good night, and thank you.